Tonight, we are focused on True Crime Tuesday, talking about a case that has captivated the world for many years, since 1981, when 6-year-old Adam Walsh was abducted from the Hollywood Mall back on July 27th, 1981. His severed head found at the Florida Turnpike. No one could have guessed what it would take police almost 30 years to find the culprit, or that they had still gotten it all so wrong. Willis Morgan, our guest, was an eyewitness at the mall the day Adam was taken. But rather than feel relief when the Hollywood Police Department finally convicted a suspect, he felt sick and frustrated. Let's, Tim, do we have that audio from the release? And I want to talk more with our guest about this, but this kind of plays nicely with the press release I just read. There was a news story, for those of you that have been following the case, where they claim to have wrapped this case up in a tidy little package with a bow. And let's go to that audio and hear what they had to say. Okay.
But let's get right to that breaking news out of Florida today. Police say they have finally solved the 1981 killing of 6-year-old Adam Walsh. Adam's father is John Walsh, host of America's Most Wanted, and he gave a very emotional, gut-wrenching news conference just a short time ago where he told the story of 27 years of pain and suffering for him and his family as they waited for some closure in this case.
For 27 years, we've been asking, who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know. The not knowing has been a torture, but that journey's over. And a lot of horrible memories in this police department, looking for that little boy. And now I think it's only fitting that it ends here in this police department. And there are a lot of good people here today. I always, for years, I tried to convince myself that justice delayed was not justice denied.
Ari Osder is from NBC's Miami affiliate WTVJ is here with us. So Ari, here's John Walsh. He's helped so many families with unsolved murders and unsolved cases get their piece, and now his family finding justice. But why did it take so long to solve this case?
A number of reasons, Tamron, outlined by the current chief of the Hollywood Police Department, Chad Wagner, and he minced no words about it. He said, you know what, we made a lot of mistakes here over the decades, and we had a culture, he said, of trying to protect ourselves, protect our investigation instead of going where the investigation would lead, because they knew they made some mistakes. And some of those mistakes were that key pieces of evidence were lost. Back in 1981, they found a car, they found bloody carpet in a car belonging to this drifter with a history of violence against children. His name was Otis Toole. He was found in jail on some other crimes in Jacksonville. They connected this car to Otis Toole, and they thought, this is probably our man here. But they lost that evidence. With today's technology, that would have been conclusive, perhaps, evidence with DNA technology to see if the blood on that carpet was that of Adam Walsh's. That's one of the major mistakes they made. He also said they spent too much time going off on tangents on other potential suspects instead of concentrating on Otis Toole, who, as a totality of evidence now reveals, and they released all the evidence on CDs today of the entire case, the chief says if you look at the entire case, one person stands out clearly as the man who did this, and that is Otis Toole. Toole died in 1996 in jail up in Jacksonville. They never got a deathbed confession from him, but he did confess several times to police about killing Adam Walsh, only to later recant those confessions. So there was always confusion about Toole, but the chief says there's no magic bullet here, no smoking gun document, nothing new as far as evidence, just that as a review of the entire case now shows clearly, he says that everything points to Otis Toole, and the investigators say if they had to prosecute him, if he was alive right now, they could take this case to court and win a conviction against Otis Toole. And it's also significant to note that from the very beginning, at least for the last 15 years or so, John Walsh and Reve Walsh, his wife, have always thought that Otis Toole was indeed the killer here based on all the evidence that they were able to see in the case without even having the access to the entire case file that we now have.
All right, Ari, thank you very much for the update. Thank you.
And I apologize for the tinny quality, but that is an old story that we were able to dig up on this. Willis Morgan, our guest, again, was an eyewitness at the mall the day Adam was taken, as well as Mia Taylor. They both tell a totally different story, and they saw the man that they believe is the murderer and abductor of Adam Walsh. And when they released this information, the Hollywood Police Department finally convicting suspect Otis Toole in 2008, our guest felt sick and very frustrated. Frustrated that a young child was snatched from right in front of him, frustrated that the evidence, leads, and witness testimony were lost, and frustrated that eyewitness testimony of Jeffrey Dahmer being at the Hollywood Mall the same day was simply disregarded. That's impactful, man. You hear them come out and John Walsh crying and feels like after 30 years they got their man. And when they brought out that press conference, were you hoping that it was going to be Jeffrey Dahmer, or were you stunned when they didn't even bring up Dahmer's name in this case?
Of course. I was there at that press conference. I was right there, and there were numerous, all those videos you see, there were numerous videos because there were numerous media outlets from across the country at that press conference. And after that press conference, I tried to tell them the truth. But they were more interested in getting their story out than hearing the truth, and so they wouldn't listen to me. But anyway, let me explain to you what's going on really quick, because we're getting short on time here. Okay, not only did I see Jeffrey Dahmer in the mall that day on July 27th, 10 years later, I was at work. This was in 1991, almost 10 years to the week, and there was this article about something that happened up in Milwaukee in an apartment up there, and a story about all these bodies that were murdered in this apartment and dismembered. And there was a mugshot, and I started freaking out. I remember even saying out loud, "This is the guy. This is the guy I saw in the mall." I mean, it was a spitting image of him. I called the library up, our company library for the Miami Herald, and I asked them, "Listen, do me a favor. You remember that composite that ran in the paper of the suspect for the Adam Walsh case? Can you send me a copy?" And they did. I took that copy, along with the mugshot that was in the paper. I went back to the Hollywood Police Department, and as well as numerous other witnesses as well, going back to them now when Dahmer made national news. And I showed them the composite, and I said, "Look, here's the composite, and this is the mugshot. You can see it's a spitting image. We're on a radio show, so I can't show you that composite, but if everybody wants to see it, they can go to my website, frustratedwitness.com. I have copies of it there. And also I have another website, justiceforadam.com, where all the case files can be read, and a Facebook page titled Frustrated Witness. Anyways, I took that back to them, and the lead detective, Jack Hoffman, he was still on the case. He's the one I talked to, and his jaw dropped when he saw that composite. And I was thinking he knows something, but he's not saying. But I didn't think any more of that because I knew they don't discuss their case with people. So I let it go. And I didn't realize that what he knew that I didn't know at the time is that I had the wrong composite. The composite I had wasn't from the Hollywood Mall. As I told you, there were other attempted abductions. This was from the Twin City Mall on July 13th, another Monday, 2 Mondays before Adam was abducted. Okay? And this was in another Sears and another toy department at the same time of day. But this was the Twin City Mall, 60 miles north of the Hollywood Mall. Now, I didn't know that until 2008 when they closed the case that you were just alluding to. And also, when Jack Hoffman's jaw dropped when I showed him that composite, I believe that's when they went into cover-up mode, and that's when all the evidence grew legs and walked off, as you heard in that little segment you just did, where they say that it was lost. It wasn't lost. It was expunged from the case files, from the evidence room. And I knew in 2008, when they closed the case, I finally got a hold of the case files. And I started going through them. And that was, at the time, they when they at that conference that you were listening to. As I said, I was there. They wouldn't give me a copy of it because they were only giving it to media outlets. I tried to tell them I worked at the Miami Herald, but another reporter already picked it up for the Herald, and they were only giving one copy out per media outlet. So I wasn't able to get one, but I had one guy that did get one. We went up to Kinko's, and I made a copy from his. And I started going through them, and that's when I realized that that wasn't composite. The library gave me was the wrong composite. It wasn't from the Hollywood Mall. It was from the Twin City Mall. And so I knew I had to contact those witnesses, and I did. And I contacted Ginger Keaton first, and she told me about the incident with her son, Terry Keaton. And they were in the mall, and this incident was identical to the Adam Walsh case, where a mother went to the mall with her son, and the son stayed back in the toy department. She was shopping aisles away. Jeffrey Dahmer came into the toy department, tried to abduct him, but he managed to get away, ran up to a couple people in the clothing department and literally clung onto this woman, Jane Hoover, and begged for his life, saying that, that man was trying to get him. And Jeffrey Dahmer locked eyes with Jane and turned around and split from the mall. Ginger wanted to report this incident to security. And so she went out to the mall, and it was out in the mall hallway where Terry says, "Mom, that's the guy." Jeffrey Dahmer split from the Sears, but he went out into the regular mall. He didn't want to give up yet, apparently. And she said that never in her life did somebody give her a stare that put the fear of God in her. She was so scared she grabbed Terry and just split from the mall, never reported it. 2 weeks later, when Adam was abducted, that's when she did go to the Riviera Police Department and report the incident, and as well as other witnesses. They were all calling the Hollywood Police Department as well. And John Atwater, that police chief from Riviera Beach, also called the Hollywood Police Department, telling them to get up there. They think that's connected to their case. So they did. They sent Jack Hoffman, along with another detective, Dennis Nylon, up there to investigate this. And they asked the Sears manager to give them a list of all the employees that worked that day, and he did. And they proceeded to interview all of them. But in the end, they dismissed all the witnesses because this is Jack Hoffman's statement, okay? And let me see. Okay, he said, Jack Hoffman said, "I put a lot of faith in the two incidents being related." That's the Hollywood Mall and the Twin City Mall. But the Hooverez, that's the witness in the clothing department that Terry clung on to, the Hooverez's composite didn't match James Campbell because that was their chief suspect at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they, instead of dismissing James Campbell, they dismissed all the witnesses. But you know what's so ironic about it? Those composites are a spitting image of the composites from witnesses from the Hollywood Mall.
Right.
They didn't make that connection. All they did was dismiss the witnesses from the Hollywood Mall and the Twin City Mall and other locations. Like I said, there were others.
Oh, how frustrating.
And they continue to interrogate James Campbell as their prime suspect. So now, when I went to them in 1991 and they made that connection, they knew that they had to cover this up. You know, they say, when you mess up really bad, never fess up. And that's what they're doing. And that's, like I said, that's when all the Otis 2 evidence, I believe, threw legs and walked off. It didn't, that's how it disappeared. That's when it disappeared as well.
One thing we're a little curious about, and I'm just curious, Willis, if you've looked into this part of it. Jeffrey Dahmer seemed to have a type that he went for, and most of them were young men. And
yes,
it doesn't really seem to fit. Even his youngest deal, his family home in Bath, Ohio, where supposedly his first victim was killed with, I think it was a barbell. They all fit a certain pattern, all the way up to his, being caught finally. How do you fit in the case of Adam Walsh and some of these other attempted young children abductions? Okay.
Now, the book on MOs has been rewritten numerous times. You remember the D.C. sniper, right? That was a white redneck with a white van.
Right.
Remember? Well, they were so wrong on that. MOs are just a general description. I mean, you can't put an MO on anybody. In Jeffrey Dahmer's case, his MO fit the times and the neighborhood that he lived in.
Mm-hmm.
They were mostly black up in Milwaukee because he lived in a black neighborhood. In Germany, they were mostly women, and German women, of course, because he was in Germany. There were numerous murders over there right around the base where he was at. I mean, we don't have time. We're running out of time. I can't get into all these murders over there. But in Florida, there were mostly kids. And listen, there are no coincidences in murder. When you have all these sites, all these witnesses, enough to fill Yankee Stadium, saying it was Jeffrey Dahmer, with their composites matching him, their statements and descriptions matching him, blue vans all over the place matching, that's not just coincidence.
All right, and I'm with you on that. I was just curious because I know some of our listeners have thrown that question to me as we've gone along here, and it does, it makes some sense if you've got, a certain type. But you're right, and as I thought, killers like this are opportunists, and they kill what they can, and if it was easier for them at that time, and I was a child of that time frame. I remember constantly going to Kmart or Zayre's or Sears with my parents, and we'd immediately break at the door. I'll go to the toy aisle. You go do what you do. Find me in the toy aisle. That was always the case. Every one of us, you'd always just see the kids walking like zombies in the toy aisle looking for whatever new release was out. That's the way it was. You don't do that anymore, but that's the way it was.
Okay, but let me just also say how MOs can and murders can vary from, an MO. Okay? Now, that meter room that we talked about, okay? That derelict that Jeffrey Dahmer found, quote-unquote, dead, okay? And I'm certain, if you want to get into that, we can get into that because of the discrepancies in the police report of what Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer claims and what his boss said are in complete contrast. That derelict was 54 years old, and he was murdered in that meter room. Adam was 6 years old, and I believe he was murdered in that meter room. So Adam was his youngest victim, I should say, and that derelict, John de Bohemo, was his oldest victim. So you have a range from 6 years old to 54 years old.
Right, and it all fits. I mean, that's...
Not only does it all fit, listen, when we got a hold of this police report, in the police report, what it said about that derelict was that what happened was when Jeffrey Dahmer told his boss there was a dead man by his dumpster, Ken Halbert, Ken said that he said it in a very matter-of-fact tone. By the way, Ken, see, it was Jeffrey Dahmer's job to take out the garbage as a busboy at the end of the shift. So around 5 p.m., he was taking the garbage out. And he told Ken about the dead man. So Ken went out to check. Sure enough, there's a dead man there. So he calls the police. The police come, and they want to know who found the body. He says, my busboy. So they said, get him out here. We need to talk to him. That's how he got his name all over the police record. And everything is in contrast to what he's telling his boss. For example, and what's in the police report, this guy had one shoe on. Jeffrey Dahmer said that Bobby was living in the meter room and that he was a derelict, he was a heavy drinker, and Bobby said he wasn't feeling well lately. And so the police looked in the meter room, and that's where they found the other shoe. He only had one shoe on. And I believe that when he dragged him out, when he took the garbage out, that's when he dragged him out to the dumpster, because he couldn't have been out by that dumpster all day long. He had to be dead for a while because this is a pretty large strip mall, and all the stores use that one large dumpster to put their garbage in. And when I contacted that police officer that made that report out, he remembered that report. He remembered the derelict, but he didn't remember Jeffrey Dahmer. He said he was just one of many witnesses. In fact, he was flabbergasted when he was told that Jeffrey Dahmer's name was on his police report. And he said he remembered the derelict because he was covered in ants and in full rigor mortis. Well, that takes a while. And somebody, if he was murdered, if he died by the dumpster, somebody would have found him before the ants. So I believe he was murdered in the meter room. He might have been in there for even as long as a day in that meter room. And Jeffrey Dahmer took the garbage out and dragged him out there. So the police looked in the meter room. He only had one shoe on. That's where they found the other shoe. So I went in the meter room and I started checking. And I'm telling you, the bumps on my arm, the goosebumps on my arm, told me that's where Adam was murdered. And that's where he took Adam, because I knew this was the guy I had an encounter with. There was no question. Believe me, when you have an incident that bad that leads to a murder of a 6-year-old, it's something that gets embedded in your brain. You never get it out.
Right.
And I remember this incident like it was yesterday. So do all the other witnesses.
Well, and it's important, too, to realize that when they did capture Jeffrey Dahmer, he had multiple heads in his house.
Absolutely.
He liked to decapitate.
Yeah, and Adam was decapitated. And Artist 2 never decapitated anyone. And also, let me say, you know that July 13th incident that we talked about?
Right.
If you believe those composites that match the Hollywood more, as I've said, and the witness statements, and I would love to get Ginger on another show with you, but if you believe these people, that these two incidents, among other incidents, all connected, Artist 2 wasn't even in the state of Florida. He was in a hospital in Newport News, Virginia, and didn't arrive in the state of Florida, never mind, not even Hollywood, Jacksonville, more than 300 miles north of Hollywood, on late afternoon of July 25th. He was carless and penniless. He had no way to get back to Jacksonville. He couldn't even buy the bus ticket. He had to go to the Salvation Army, and they gave him money for the bus ticket. And there's a phone call to prove that. At 3:30 on Friday night, he made a phone call from that Salvation Army. It's on the record. They have the record of the phone call, because one of the requirements to get that bus money for the bus ticket is that he has to show when he gets to Jacksonville that he's going to be employed. He's going to have work.
Right.
So he called a former employer, and they said they would re-employ him as a roofer, which is the work that he was doing. He was working for South Coast Roofing or something like that, and they verified that before they gave him that bus ticket. Actually, they gave him a check that was made out to Greyhound for the amount of the bus ticket. And Greyhound cashed it and gave him the bus ticket, one-way ticket to Jacksonville. When he got to Jacksonville, like I said, he was carless and penniless. He didn't have that car till like over a year after he was in Jacksonville. He had absolutely nothing to do with this. This was Detective Joe Matthews who perpetrated that hoax on everyone. Joe Matthews is one of the original detectives. How he got involved in the case, because he wasn't even a Hollywood police detective. He worked for the Miami Beach Police Department, but he also had his own company called Southern Institute of Polygraph. And they hired his company, the Hollywood Police Department, to polygraph the Walshes and James Campbell, which he did, and he exonerated the Walshes and 3 times exonerated James Campbell. And all these detectives were fighting over that because they didn't want James Campbell to be exonerated. They wanted him to change the conclusion and at least say it was inconclusive. And so they were fighting like cats and dogs over there at the Hollywood Police Department. So anyway, when John Walsh got his TV show, America's Most Wanted, when he became host of it, this detective, Joe Matthews, heard about that. He calls John Walsh up, and John Walsh remembered that he's the one that gave everybody the polygraphs and eliminated them. He hired Joe as the senior lead investigator. See, this is what a lot of people don't realize. He was the senior lead investigator on that show, America's Most Wanted. So John Walsh had one of these detectives right in his midst for years, feeding him false information about his own son's abduction.
Unbelievable. We have to take a break. Willis Morgan, our guest. We have a link up to Willis's website, and you can find that at darknessradio.com under our True Crime Guest tab. We'll be back with more right after this. We're back. This is Darkness Radio on a True Crime Tuesday. Our guest this evening is Willis Morgan, and he is the author of Frustrated Witness, the true story of the Adam Walsh case and police misconduct. We have a link up to his websites and to the book. You can go find that at darknessradio.com under the guests tab. and we'll have all that information available for you right there on the website. So go check that out. And before the break, we were just talking, Willis, about how just poorly this was all handled, and eyewitnesses were excused and blown off because in their eyes they already had their guy, they already knew where they wanted to go, and they as you said, you had enough eyewitnesses to fill a stadium, and none of them were taken seriously.
Right. You know, as I said, some police departments, they have a tendency when they mess up not to fess up.
Right.
And Milwaukee Police Department is doing the same thing. Let me just say about Jeffrey Dahmer. He's credited for 17 murders, correct?
I believe, 17 around there, right.
But there's others that they don't want to make the connection to because there could have been riots in Milwaukee, like Ferguson. Okay. One of the victims from Jeffrey Dahmer escaped Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. That was a little Laotian kid named Samantha something. I'm botching his name up, I'm sure. But he was a 14-year-old Asian child that escaped from Dahmer's apartment. What Dahmer did was he drilled a hole in this guy's head, and with a turkey basting needle, injected muriatic acid into his brain, trying to make a living zombie. This is one of his experiments that he was doing. And he thought his experiment was working pretty good, so he left and went out to go drinking. But his zombie escaped, and he was walking around in a trance on the street, I think it was 25th, butt naked. These two black girls, 17 and 18 years old, saw this kid. They called 911. The police arrive, and then who shows up? Jeffrey Dahmer on the way back from the bar. And he's telling the cops that this is his 19-year-old lover. And the girls are protesting, saying, no, he's not 19. Look at him. He's just a child. And the cops tell the girls, they said, listen, take off or we're going to take you downtown. They did not want to hear it because they claim, as well as the black community claimed that back then, the police did not want to listen to a black person over a white person. They believed Jeffrey Dahmer. They handed the kid back to Jeffrey Dahmer, and Dahmer immediately killed that young boy and severed his head and boiled his head and kept the skull as a trophy. Okay. Now, that was after he was captured, before they realized what happened, that kid was given back to him. And there was also another murder case, in fact, several of them, that were open cases, open homicide cases. One of them was in several of them, I should say, were in Jeffrey Dahmer's own building where he lived. And the police knew those homicides, especially the one from Dean Vaughn, had to be somebody within the 49 units of the Oxford building because they had a locked door. You needed a key to get in. And if you were a visitor, you had to use the intercom system to be buzzed in. Okay, so they were certain. They went to everybody. They interviewed everybody, including Jeffrey Dahmer. And when they were in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, they asked Jeffrey Dahmer if he knew the guy. Jeffrey Dahmer said, no, you don't know him. And they asked if he could search his apartment. He said, you can search all you want, but they never searched his apartment. If they did, they would have found a dead body on his bed. And they left, and that was an open homicide. And that's not the only other time they were in that building. They were in that building numerous times for all the stench calls and other things that were going on in that apartment. Now, Dean Vaughn was found in apartment 308 on his bed, drugged, strangled, and sodomized. He had his pants pulled down to his ankles, and he was laying dead on his bed. So after Jeffrey Dahmer was captured for all those murders in his own apartment, that's when everything started coming together. But the police never wanted to make the connection to Dean Vaughn. When they interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer, they asked Dahmer, as I said, if he knew Dean Vaughn, and Dahmer insisted still that he didn't even know the guy. But I've called other residents in that building, and they swear String Bean went into that's Dean Vaughn, they called him String Bean, went into Dahmer's apartment, and they seen Dahmer going into his apartment periodically. So that was a lie. Dahmer lies all the time, but they believe his lies because they want to. They don't want to make connections. And the manager also told me that Dahmer's been in his apartment with a six-pack trying to get him to drink, but he was the manager, and people would come in, either friends or somebody to talk about an apartment, and so Dahmer didn't like company. He would just split. 3 times that happened, and he believes Dahmer was trying to murder him as well because he was giving Dahmer a hard time about all the stench. In fact, one time he went to Dahmer's apartment and to check and see what was stinking so bad, and he saw this blue bell in Dahmer's bedroom. He said, "What is this?" And Dahmer opened it up. It happened to be empty, but the fumes, he said, almost knocked him to the floor. It stunk so bad. So he ordered Dahmer to get rid of it, and he's going to be back in an hour to check. Well, before he got a chance to go back to Dahmer's apartment, Dahmer went to the office and said, "Listen, I want to take you to the dumpster and show you something." He takes him to the dumpster, and he shows him the blue bell. He got rid of it. So that ended that. But that was the same blue bell that was seen being removed from his apartment after he was captured. It had 4 torsos in it, and it was filled with muriatic acid. So obviously he went and retrieved it. But the police, they just don't want to make the connections. In the same way as Miami. They don't want to make the connections to Jeffrey Dahmer because it would make them look more horrendous and more miserable, the investigation of the Adam Walsh case, than anyone could imagine.
Right. It's unbelievable. Willis Morgan, our guest. We have to take our final break. We'll be back with just one more segment here on True Crime Tuesday. The frustrated witness himself is with us tonight on True Crime Tuesday. You are hitting some nerves, I will tell you, Willis. We are getting pounded with emails and comments on my Facebook and private emails here on Darkness Radio. People are absolutely enthralled with what you're sharing this evening. And what I'd like to do is, I mentioned you off air, I will invite you to join me as my guest for a full 4 hours on Coast to Coast in June, and give us a chance to flesh this out more. And I think we're also going to try to invite, with your okay, I think we're going to try to invite the officer on the show, Detective Joe Matthews, and see if he'd like to come on and talk about the other side of this and see how easily or what kind of struggle there is in shooting either one of these sides down. So if you'd like to do that, we'd love to have you, Willis.
Yes, and I would like to do that, but I can tell you now, Joe Matthews will not show up, but what he might do is have Les Standiford fill in for him. Les Standiford is an English professor who wrote the book for Bringing Adam Home for Joe.
Sure.
And that's probably what he will do. And I'm going to tell you what he's going to do, because he's already been doing this on other sites. My Facebook page, I had to ban him. Other sites had to ban him because all he's doing is being obstructive. All you have to do is go to Amazon.com or go to my website, frustratedwitness.com, and I put the one-star book review titled A Joke of a Book, referring to my book, and I put that there. You can read it, and you can also read my response. And other people that write reviews on Amazon, he writes comments to them, debunking me, and he'll pick one discrepancy and one by one eliminate every witness, and this is exactly what the police department did. And this is how they eliminate all the witnesses. They say if you have 10 witnesses to an accident, you're going to get 10 different versions.
Right.
That doesn't mean they aren't genuine witnesses and they weren't there. But this is what they will use, all those discrepancies, to dismiss one by one each witnesses. And this is what they will attempt to do if you get them on the show. And if you want, that's up to you. I don't mind them being on the show, but I'm just letting you know what they're going to attempt to do. Now, let me just tell you about these detectives in the Hollywood Police Department. Why, as we told about Milwaukee Police Department and the Hollywood Police Department, things that they don't want people to know, and that's why they cover up. One of the other witnesses, this guy's name is Vernon Jones. He was 9 years old. He was a young black boy. He was also playing the video games with Adam for a short time. He was playing an Atari baseball game with Adam. And there was this guy standing to his left, hissing at him, like, psst, psst, hey, you, come here, like that. And he looked over to this guy thinking to himself, man, I'm not going with you. And just then he heard a big crack. It was Adam. He just got a grand slam home run. And Adam looked at him with this big smile on his face. Now, being an older kid at 9 and Adam being only 6, he was upset by getting beat by the 6-year-old kid. So he just left and went on to the other side of the aisle and started playing Donkey Kong by himself and left Adam there with this man. And he saw this man walking by with Adam hand in hand going out the exit. So this is another witness. Now, when he was home, he was with his grandfather, visiting his grandparents who live in Hallandale. And his grandfather works in the lawn care business, so he went to Sears to the tool department. Vernon, not being interested in tools at 9, stayed in the toy department. And that evening, they called Vernon to the living room and said, Vern, get in here. You at the Hollywood Sears toy department. Did you see this boy on TV? And Vern looked at it and said, Grandpa, that's the boy I was playing the video game with. So the grandfather took him the very next morning to the Hollywood Police Department. They never made it inside because there was a heavy-set white male police officer at the entrance. He went up to that police officer to inquire about the case, and that police officer turned to his grandfather, spat a wad of tobacco on his grandfather's shoe, and said, boy, I ain't got time for this. Vernon says to this day he remembers pictures that tobacco splattering all over his grandfather's shoe. So his grandfather took Vernon by the hand and left. They wouldn't hear from Vernon until he grew up in his 20s when he wrote America's Most Wanted a letter, telling him how bad he feels about this. And he was only 9. He didn't understand. And the America's Most Wanted forwarded that letter to the Hollywood Police Department telling them to contact this witness and to interview him and call him. To this day, they've never interviewed him. And they've done that with many witnesses they've never interviewed. They refuse to interview some of these witnesses.
Makes no sense. You would think, with as much of an advocate for justice that John Walsh is, that he would want the answers. He would want this finally to come out and be justice for his son.
Exactly, but he does. That's the whole point. Except he's got these detectives right in his midst who he considers Joe Matthews his best friend and colleague.
Right.
Telling him that, I'm just out this for in this for whatever other motives that he makes up to John, that there's no validity to anything I'm saying. But it's not just me. He doesn't mention that there's many witnesses. Like I told you, there's a Yankee Stadium full of witnesses. I just mentioned a couple of them here, Vernon Jones and Ginger and her son Terry Keaton, and me that you talked to. That's only the tip of the iceberg. There's many witnesses. And he never called any. The only witnesses Joe ever called when he put his manuscript together were Artist Tool's cellmates. And they would say things that, yeah, of course we know he did it. Everybody around the prison knows Artist Tool did it. That's not evidence. This is the kind of witnesses he called. And then other witnesses like Barry Grimilli, who passed away, and he just makes up what Barry said. And I know that for a fact because I have Barry's interview in the state attorney's files, which you can read on my website, justiceforadam.com, where Barry says that I was watching this TV show, and I saw John Walsh come on and say something about a deathbed confession, and that just isn't so. That just never happened. Artist Tool never talked about the Adam Walsh case or any other case. He never opened up to anybody.
Right.
Joe Matthews is saying that he interviewed Barry, and Barry's telling him about this full confession Artist Tool was making. Well, either you believe Joe Matthews and what he says after somebody passed away, or you believe the interview that he gave that's on record.
Why do you think Artist Tool would make repeated admissions to this only to renege them again?
Right, because Artist Tool wasn't the only one. There were numerous suspects that were confessing. The problem is they eliminated every single one of them, okay? Mostly because they were able to pin down the day they were on July 27th. Now, Artist Tool, in the beginning, they couldn't pin him down where he was, but except within a day and a half. Like I said, he arrived back on the 25th of July. Adam was abducted on the 27th. Okay, so the other suspects were all eliminated, and the reason they confess is to get field trips like Artist Tool got. Now he got a field trip to South Florida, But according to Jack Hoffman, all the original detectives dismissed Otis Toole within 4 months. Detective Hoffman is the only one. And of course, the police chief, because he convinced the police chief to call the case. What he did was he wrote up a 400-page manuscript, okay, pinning this on Otis Toole, and he gave it to the police chief and convinced him to close the case, which the police chief did. Now, the police chief knew it wasn't Otis Toole when he closed the case. They only did this because they knew they can get away with it. They go after the downtrodden. They pin murders on them because they have no education, no family, no money, and in Otis Toole's case, they do it posthumously. After he's already passed, he can't even defend himself. And they pin murders on him just to make themselves look good.
Right.
Whether Detective Hoffman did this for egotistical reasons or whether to placate the Walshes or whether just stuck on stupid or a combination of everything, he pinned a murder on somebody that was an innocent man. Had nothing to do with this. Now, I have all the original statements from the other detectives. Now, this is the second lead detective on the case, Detective Ron Hickman.
We only have 30 seconds left, Willis.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll do this on the next show.
Right, and we've only scratched the surface.
But if they want more information and you don't have the money to buy the book, you don't want to buy the book, go to my website, frustratedwitness.com. From there you can go to Amazon and look at the book, read the comments and the reviews, and also I have a Facebook page, Frustrated Witness, and I have another website where all the case files can be reviewed, and that's justiceforadam.com.
justiceforadam.com. Willis Morgan, our guest this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, Willis, and I look forward to a deeper, longer conversation with you in June on Coast to Coast AM.